Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to talk to you guys about rethinking awareness and having a high impact way to capture student attention. My name is Erin Ward. I am the CMO here at NextGrad, and I have been in higher education for about 4.5 years, or higher education marketing for about 4.5 years. Strictly been on the agency side before making my way to NextGrad on the vendor side, and I'm really excited to have Tyler Seabaugh with us today. He's our Senior Director of College Partnerships. And Tyler, why don't you just take a second to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background?
Yeah. Hey, thanks for being here, Erin. I'm Tyler. I'm with NextGrad, obviously, and I work heavily on the college partnership side. My background is about 10 years in higher ed, in admissions and enrollment specifically, before I jumped ship and came over to the vendor side and joined NextGrad. I was an end user of NextGrad before I jumped on board. And so, yeah, it was great to make a smooth transition from a partner to, a workplace.
And can you talk a little bit more about your role and why you switched to the vendor side? I know you talked about being a customer of NextGrad, but like, what was it about this product line or about this organization that made you want to come to quote unquote the dark side from enrollment marketing?
Yeah, I think that's the perception there. So my role is to really continue working with higher education institutions, specifically in marketing or admissions, and help them align their strategies in enrollment marketing or marketing in general to get in front of the right audiences. And that was a big reason why I switched to NextGrad, is because I believed in the mission, I believed in the product, and I used it to generate results for myself and my team and give us exposure in key markets where we didn't have the strongest foothold, if you will. And so being able to jump on board as a partner and have a really sweet, unique product that's in a niche market, kind of just consistently showing what I need in these high schools consistently, was really attractive to me. And then to be able to kind of portray that story and work with each institution that I get to work with across the country here, and kind of understand that each institution is unique, just like the students that we recruit, and what their needs are and how they need to get in front of student populations and drive awareness and gain traction. And so, I loved that. And so that's kind of something that really drawed me here, is like, hey, if I can do this with multiple institutions, 10, 20, 50, 100 institutions a year, then that's like, that's building, knowledge for me as a person, and being able to kind of blend a few of my strengths together. So, and Erin, you've lived in the marketing world for a number of years, as you mentioned, especially like on the higher ed side. How did that experience and your background kind of, shape how you think about student decision-making from a marketing perspective? Obviously, I come from the enrollment side. Talk a little bit about that from the marketing side.
Yeah. So one thing I found really interesting about higher ed marketing specifically is the long sales cycle, right? So you have this incredibly long sales cycle for something that people are going to typically purchase only one time in their life. Of course, you have those forever students, my sister being one of them. She has 2 master's degree and an undergrad degree. She's probably going to get her PhD eventually, but she's kind of the anomaly, not the like true experience of every single individual. And some people don't even choose higher education. We can have that conversation later. But I think what was really interesting about it is that there was this sense of, we have to try to persuade consumer behavior, build brand affinity for this one thing that gets bought once. And you can look at it similarly to how people buy vehicles, because it kind of has a similar take. Like, people do a ton of research when they're buying a vehicle. Yes, they typically buy more than one vehicle in a lifetime, but the same amount of impressions and the buying decision and a longer sales cycle happens when individual and consumers buy vehicles. So I was just really interested in that, and just kind of seeing how institutions as brands and as entities respond to their prospective students as consumers, I thought was a really, really interesting way to understand how marketing works kind of in this controlled environment. Obviously, I've had agency experience on the business to consumer and business to business side. I've worked with like original equipment manufacturers, which are kind of a CapEx as well. But it's just really interesting to see how personal and how approachable institutions have to be in order for them to make that buying decision. So a lot to unpack there, but there's just so much to think about when you have this like one-time buy for this under 18-year-old to make this decision. There has to be so much nuance inside of the marketing that happens around that it was just really interesting to me.
Yeah, well, that's a great segue here. So a couple questions that kind of expand on that.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, from the background of marketing here,
Yeah.
a couple questions, twofold. One is, what do you think happens? Like, why is some like really top of funnel often overlooked or kind of pushed to the side? And then what is the result of pushing that super top of funnel to like, hey, we're going to focus on middle and bottom of funnel only. We feel like we got it up here, however that case may be. So talk to me about kind of what happens whenever you negate the top and only kind of focus maybe on the middle or bottom of the funnel from the marketing side.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, I'm talking about the marketing funnel. Tyler, we'll talk a little bit more about the enrollment funnel when we get to you. But I think higher ed has really leaned into performance marketing because it's really easy to measure, right? But sometimes it's easy to forget that performance only works when it's supported by brand. And I don't even like segmenting them anymore. I think they're so homogenous and one and the same. But you also have to keep in mind that digital isn't as effective as it looks. A significant portion, basically 4 out of every $10 that are spent on digital, go to the wrong audience. And it's even harder when you're trying to market to under 18. So a lot of the conversation I'll have today is around like the traditional undergrad student, but there are a lot of data restrictions around targeting digitally to students that are under 18. So it's really hard to even know if you're reaching them on digital, even with all of the data that you have. Snapchat, I think, is still the only one that actually lets you actively target to 16 to 18-year-olds. So just keep that in mind as higher ed institutions really focus on performance. But also keep in mind that top of funnel really has had a cost perception problem for a really long time, right? People associate all top of funnel tactics to be billboards and traditional TV and traditional radio, which typically have had very big line items on the marketing spend overall. So schools tend to avoid it because of this like perception that it carries. But let's keep in mind that when top of funnel is ignored, performance channels are forced to do too much more, right? You're spending probably 2 times per dollar to try to get the same kind of brand activation or top of funnel activity in your middle of funnel activity. Yeah. And when you take the top of funnel out, I'm saying funnel a lot, but when you take that top of funnel tactic out, it's no longer a funnel, right? There's a reason why it's shaped like an inverted triangle, because you have to fill the top to get to the middle, to get to the bottom. So you can't necessarily convert the same way that you think you can when you negate those things. And one of the things I think about is like you recycle the same audiences over and over and over again. Search and social only get you so far with targeting. You're pulling from the same audiences. There's something called ad fatigue, especially with Gen Alpha and Gen Z. They get tired of seeing the same ads over and over again, just like you and I do as consumers. Right. Yeah. So if you're not kind of hitting them in a different way, they start to ignore your brand completely. So not only are you losing brand perception and brand equity and brand value, you're also losing that middle of funnel performance activity because they're so tired of seeing your ads. So it's kind of like running a store that you never restock, right? You have to restock the store when the products run out or consumers are over a specific product. I mean, look at Coca-Cola. They have 55 different products on the shelves. It's because they want to make sure that they're keeping you engaged with that brand overall. And if you don't restock those shelves, they're not going to engage with you as a brand. So it's really important that top of funnel stays part of the conversation. And Tyler, when we talk about the enrollment side of the funnel, this is where I'd love to get your perspective. So what happens when you see awareness get low? How does it impact inquiries, campus visits, yield, events, all of that goes into like the critical pieces of the enrollment funnel?
Yeah, it's an uphill battle regardless. Because I mean, for every student that's out there, there's, 20 institutions recruiting them, trying to pull them in. They're interested in 10 to 15 of those 20 institutions. They're going to apply to 8 to 10 of them, right? And then it just keeps getting smaller and smaller, but naturally you get weeded out if the interest is low or it's not the right fit, right? We talk about that a lot in higher ed admissions is personalization and the right fit student to really set realistic goals and to enroll a class that's just going to be sustainable year over year. When the awareness is low, you have to fight through, well, who are you whenever you're at the table visits or the lunches, or the college fairs, and mom and dad are even walking through and they're like, no, I haven't heard of you, and you're a local provider. Like, that kind of stings you a little bit. It's like, well, we've been here for 75 years or 100 years, and have these, graduates that are in the field here. It's a perception thing. And so then the trust is a little bit lower, because it's like, you talked about buying a car. If there's a new manufacturer that comes out that's brand new, sure, you may have somebody jump in there. But if you've been buying Hondas your whole life, you're probably just going to stick with what you know, right? It's like there's a reputation, there's a brand that's been built, and there's an understanding of the value that's associated with that. And so if there's a low awareness issue, then you kind of start below the basement and you're trying to like work your way up here. People don't want to give you their information if they don't trust you. And so that's literally what you're doing with an inquiry card or an application, or showing up as a campus visit is like, 2 or 3 times that, right? You're more likely to yield if you show up on campus and get a feel for where you're at. But you're still kind of fighting like the trust value that you kind of inherently will have in general with higher education, especially nowadays. So, I think it just kind of gives a little bit of that standoffness, of like, hey, I don't want to engage with the table. If I do, it's going to be at kind of a surface level. Maybe I like your swag or something like that. But it affects the behavior for sure.
And let's flip the coin. So let's say that a brand has done a really good job of communicating their brand and has really put it out there. Let's think, let's take like the big schools, the Big 12, SEC schools out of that conversation, because there's so much to unpack there. But when you have a smaller regional institution, maybe a private institution, and they have become more familiar with your brand, how does that engagement at those lunches, campus visits, how is it different? What does it look like? How do you interact with that student particularly?
Yeah, it's almost like it's like a little less fishing to get folks to have attention and bring them to your table. As a recruiter, if there's recruiters watching this, you know what it's like to stand there and watch herds of students walk by that you could legitimately make a strong case for, like, they would be a strong fit at your institution, especially as a regional local provider. You're going to have access to all sorts of financial aid locally and in-state students that you can support in ways that you can't with some of these other populations. And so you're just sitting there as the recruiter, as the director, going, those students belong on my campus and they just don't know it yet. And so now I have to fight for them to know who we are, and then have them trust me enough to take an action to give me a chance to go get them. But it changes completely. I've been that smaller regional institution at the parent fair where everybody's there. There's 100 institutions plus the military, and folks are walking by and they line up at the bigger name schools that we won't name here, that you referenced there, like that have the big brands, that have the D1 athletics and have the pull naturally to these things. But there's also a level of trust that was built there before they even showed up to that event, that they know who that person is, they know they're going to be there, and they do want to go talk to them about their 130 programs that they offer, and I'm interested in one. So the behavior is crazy different. It's just it's a product that and even if you haven't engaged with it or invested in one of those D1 institutions, they have been around long enough. They have the support systems. They're not going anywhere. There's just a ton of inherent trust and value that's kind of already started there. You're at the main level there.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I think out of home does well, or at least our product, is kind of like reduce the friction, right? Because those institutions have had multiple decades of building that brand equity, right? In a way that we're trying to expedite when we're those small regional institutions. And for me, it doesn't seem like out of home gets enough credit in that conversation, like especially when institutions start to market to the younger generation. So from your enrollment perspective, why do you think out of home resonates specifically with Gen Z and Gen Alpha?
Well, I think it's almost often like whenever we're talking about out of home, we're talking about placing your brand in the right location. If it's a billboard on the side of the highway, like you're not just choosing any highway or any billboard, you're choosing the right highway with the right billboard, right? So that you can hopefully have the right commuter to then, like it just kind of goes down your funnel that you're talking about. From the enrollment side, it's about meeting the students where they live. And it's like, well, if I can't be on their phone at night because it's really hard to segment my digital marketing, and enrollment leaders were not great digital marketers. But if we can't show up on their phone every day at night or during the day for 8 hours while they're at school, well, how can I? Well, this is one of these ways that NextGrad we check that box. You show up every day inside the high schools from, the time that they show up till the time that they leave. And whenever they come back for the wrestling event or the basketball game, oh yeah, we're still there. And so it's about showing up in those places. I think it doesn't get the credit because I think of some of the things we've talked about, of like the cost perception, right? Of that. It's also not a traditional medium for enrollment leaders. Like, we're thinking about campus visits and showing up in high schools in a physical, like, I'm sending John here or I'm sending Matt to this location, and they have their territories and they're showing up in person. And so that's got to be good enough. And it's like, well, they're only there maybe once a month or once every 6 weeks. And so is that enough to have the attention that you need to generate the action throughout the funnel? I don't think so. And so that's like things have shifted, right? Like, it used to be billboards. I think now there's place-based media. It used to be, cable television. Now there's CTV that really can like segment and get in these different places. And I think whenever you start talking out of home, it doesn't get the credit because I think maybe it's just less known, but it's meeting these populations in a way that they want with a medium that they're used to, and it being a digital or a physical presence that they can't scroll and they can't press unsubscribe whenever it just shows up. It's undeniable at that point.
Yeah, and I think like creatively too, it also helps that our screens are very similar to this. The size specifications and creative requirements are very similar to like the phone screen, like a TikTok or an Instagram story. So it has kind of same that same perception, that same read basically as they would have on their phone. So you'd worked obviously in Midwestern high schools in your previous role, and you mentioned that you were a buyer of this product. So why do you think it, on top of kind of the reasons you've explained, just more about the generation, how they interact with out of home, but why do you think this product is so successful in these high schools and versus, let's say, like an airport ad specifically for this traditional undergrad audience?
Yeah, well, I think for undergraduate targeted efforts, this is about as targeted as it gets. And so you're really just reaching the right audience of 14 to 18-year-olds. So you're either getting actionable seniors or you're building a brand with underclassmen that are, your next 3 classes of cohorts of students that are coming through your doors there. I think it resonates and works so well because it's just, again, it's one of those things that's there, and it's not another flyer that they have to take home and read or try not to lose. It's just that repeated exposure and showing up in the way that you need to, so that whenever it comes time to have that 7th or 8th touch point for them to generate an action, you've showed up in all the ways that you can. I don't think that it's about building, some of our colleagues have mentioned like not finding a silver bullet, but building a web. And I think this is a part of that. It's like, it's successful because one thing doesn't work anymore. It's way too complex for that. And there's way too many people doing cool stuff all over the place. And so the brands that are willing to kind of flex a little bit and be fun and engage with these new style of students and meet them where they're at, those are the ones that are going to win out. And so I think that's why it's successful. So it's just a part of the mix. It's not the mix. It is a part of the mix to bring all of those things together and show up in the right place. And Aaron, you've talked a lot about brand affinity and repeated exposure and all of those types of things. Can you explain from your perspective why like showing up physically and having real world visibility can matter so much on the marketing side of folks submitting RFIs or all these other things that generate action, maybe on the performance side?
Well, I mean, you've touched on a lot of them, but brand affinity comes from repeated exposure, right? And you've mentioned it. Students are more likely to engage with a brand that they've seen multiple times, just like they would with any other product that's on the market. Even if it's something as simple as they can buy on Amazon, they're not going to, typically people don't buy on the first time they see a product unless it's something they really, really actually need. So I think it's really important to understand that like brand affinity comes from building trust by repeated exposure. I also think the physical visibility of our screens inside of high school has a really big impact, especially when you look at like Gen Z. We're still learning information about Gen Alpha, but like 89% or 85% of Gen Z has reported that they've taken action after seeing some kind of out-of-home ad. They want to interact with ads in physical spaces, and we're seeing it more and more. People are, like you mentioned, getting creative in how they can interact with brands. People are even using AI to simulate out of home kind of in the social environment as well, because they know the impact that having something that feels scaled and voluminous and grand can actually have an impact. And I think when you have something like our screens, which are much larger than a standard 8x11 poster inside a high school, they're going to naturally respond to it because it has that size, scale, and visibility. I also think when we talk about like retargeting specifically, like that familiarity pays off downstream too, right? When students later see institutions on their feeds, they're more likely to take action, right? Because they're familiar with it. They've seen this. Oh yeah, I remember I saw that. I wanted to look into that. When there's some kind of like stream of ad, when you think about the progress of like ad 1A, ad 2A, ad 3A, and you kind of create that environment with retargeting, and you kind of develop this like ad stream across different types of media, you're going to see that pay off too. This is not, we're not saying you shouldn't spend on digital. We're saying that this is an accessory, this is a benefit, this is an addition to enhance those digital campaigns. And I think the institutions that think about that as like a sequence perform way better than those that think of this as just like, this is a one-off thing that has this level of impact. You're right. It is a web, not a silver bullet. And I love that. I want to use that in the future. So I'm really excited about that.
Aaron, give us, so for the enrollment folks or the new admissions counselors, give us a 30-second, what's retargeting?
Yeah, retargeting is basically when you can use some kind of previous interaction, whether it's a website visit, an IP address, a geofence around a specific location, to serve people ads specific to your institution. So one of the ways that we've seen people use our product or NextGrad's product as part of their retargeting effort is they'll use a specific landing page and then retarget people that have visited that landing page, or we'll do something called geoframing. So we'll frame basically, let's say a 0.5 mile radius around a specific address, which is typically the high school. Anytime somebody kind of comes into that frame or that fence and then they leave, they actually get served an ad digitally, right? So there's some really unique ways that we can pull some of that data to then serve them ads that doesn't impact their privacy. So parents can get those ads too. Counselors will get those ads as well, but there's also frequency limits. So you're not going to see it, more than 4 times within a month. But yeah, it's basically serving somebody an ad that's already either seen one of your ads in a physical space or have interacted with your website. You're going to serve them ads while they're scrolling on a website, news website, recipe website. You'll see them on the corner. And it's just a really cost-effective way to kind of keep your brand top of mind with them.
Awesome. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, you got it. So Tyler, obviously you talk to partners every day because you're amazing.
Yep.
So what is the typical reaction when you walk them through our pricing?
Yeah, I would say the first thing that comes to mind is that it is a little bit of a surprise, I think, of how efficient having a presence and a digital out of home kind of medium can be. I think just because of some of the things that we've already talked about of the, repeated, like, hey, these used to be huge ticket items on the marketing budget for TV advertising or for billboards and longer exposures on certain highways. And I think whenever we start talking about how a la carte the options are to choose the locations and to have the presence at the right time when you want it, that hasn't existed. And so I think we're going to fight that a little bit for a while, of just folks not knowing exactly how it works, and to assume that since we are, a billboard of sorts inside the high schools, that billboards have always been expensive and tough to manage, and you can't switch out creative assets and all of these other things. And so it kind of becomes like this larger conversation. But I think whenever we talk about cost specifically, they tend to like, oh, wow, that's a lot cheaper than I thought it would be. And obviously, as you stack up as many as you can, yes, things get expensive. But I think understanding that you can meet your strategy with this value somewhere in the middle, I think is new to folks. And so it's kind of catches them off guard a little bit.
Yeah. And I think you talked a little bit about like why there's an overestimation of the top of funnel marketing in general. And it's probably just because of the relationship. But when we talk about like overestimating costs and the perception of ROI and these conversations you're having with partners, can you walk us through a little bit more about that and kind of what your perspective is on value, cost, ROI, and maybe that overestimation?
Yeah. So that's probably an hour webinar in itself. But,
Sure.
but quickly, I mean, I think it's one of those things where you start talking about building your web of ways to catch students and engage them in a way that is new and actually works. And so there's things that admissions and enrollment leaders have done for decades, and they're still doing now. And it makes me scratch my head sometimes. The amount of postcards that we send that get thrown away, or we build a new one-sheeter and then we print and then we go deploy it into these high schools, and then it sits in a filing cabinet and it gets thrown away. I mean, I think there's so many things that get tossed and wasted here. I think the biggest thing I would put is, how do you have access to the populations that are going to feed your enrollment on a consistent basis? This is one of the ways to do so. And so I would say you could start with the conversation of return on investment with access and ability to switch out content and tell your story from the insides of these hallways. And I think it's tough to put an ROI value on building trust inside schools that you need action from. I've talked with some smaller private faith-based institutions that really struggle with the perception of the kind of students that they would accept on their campus. And whenever I talk to them in our meetings, it's like, hey, we want everybody and everybody's welcome. Well, here's your chance to tell it from the inside out and not have it be thrown away in the trash without having it get a second look. Whenever I think about ROI, I think about how much of what are we doing is trackable, and then how much of it that isn't trackable is in the right place, in the right time, showing up where I need it every single day. And so I think it's a different thing for every institution that I talk to. I mean, I talk to VPs of enrollment at the same time that my next meeting's with the chief marketing officer, and they have two completely different ideas of what they're using NextGrad for, or what they're doing in their marketing funnel that's unique to this institution. And it just becomes so unique. It's just like, recruiting a student. It's, getting a college on board and understanding what they're focusing on. Like, they may not have a brand issue, or they may not think that they have a brand issue until things go the wrong way. And then it's like, okay, well, now we have to somehow get that back. How do we do that? And so that's always such a blurry and gray line there, but it's one of my favorite conversations to have, because there's value here, and there's value in a lot of these higher ed vendors and partners that are out there. And it just becomes, how does it fit into your web and your strategy of gaining attraction, garnering attention, and then actually yielding the students? It's a complex thing to do.
And we're kind of getting into the season where they have to think through that complex planning, right? We're starting to think about, as the spring comes, they're starting to build their enrollment strategies, right? They're starting to think, well, maybe not thinking about it right this particular moment as we record on December 16th, but it's certainly going to come knocking on their door really, really soon. So what are some of the biggest mistakes you see when schools are starting that early funnel planning?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I think, and I think we're all guilty of this, is just having an inherent idea of your perception
Yeah.
before you get started with your plan,
Yeah.
and not actually, being real with yourself of like, okay, I think that we're good in these local schools, but are we? If I go to these schools and I ask a sophomore or a junior, hey, I'm with this institution, do you know who we are or what we do? And they say no. Well, I would say we have an issue there. And so these are the folks that are coming your way in the next year or two. And I think from the top down, we start looking further out. VPs are looking 5 to 10 years out, and directors are looking like the now to 3. And so it just becomes like, I think the biggest mistake I have made personally is like, hey, I think locally we're okay. And then, here in a year or two, the strategy is really focused on these new markets and we lose our backyard. You can never lose your backyard in enrollment. It's so hard to get it back. And so I don't know. I would have to say maybe starting there. There's so many to choose from, but I would say probably there. And for you, Aaron, like marketing teams can probably feel just as overwhelmed as an enrollment, team that is trying to figure out how to enroll the class. It really is a good combination of enrollment and marketing to drive the butts in the seats and getting the foot traffic through the doors. What's a simple way that they can start building awareness without a big budget? Because I hear it all the time. Hey, budget's an issue. We're pulling back. We had a record class, but we got budget cut 30%. I mean, there's a bunch of people that are watching this going, "Yep, that happened to me." So how do you start with that? Like, what's a simple way to start? Like, hey, we need to market. Don't have a huge budget. What do I do?
Yeah. So I think any kind of legacy marketer will remember Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups. And there are these like places where people already exist that are like mind or your customers. So you have to find those places where your audience already gathers, right? And it doesn't mean being everywhere. Like airport ads make sense for think like executive MBA programs where they have a ton of adult learners who are traveling, even like masters in construction or engineering, where they're typically like civil engineering traveling a few different places. Those are great places to market for specific programs or specific people because they're gathering in a specific place that kind of already may be traveling for business, for example. But the same thought applies to traditional undergrad students, and the most affordable way to show up, or the most affordable way to build that awareness, is to show up in places where they already are and is in that niche high attention space where they're paying attention all the time, right? You talk about it being in high schools 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, 8 sometimes plus hours a day because they're going to the wrestling or basketball or volleyball in my case. So it's really important that you think about that. That's why I think NextGrad is probably one of the best products on the market for traditional undergrad students. It's because we've made a culture, we've made a niche space for these high school students to interact with a medium that they already like. And we're expanding constantly. I think our network we just announced that we're at 1 million students in our network. We have 600 screens contracted. It's a large volume of students. We're not talking about 5 screens in 5 high schools. Like the volume of students you can reach, whether you're testing a new market specifically, thinking about, hey, we've always been in Illinois, but we kind of want to test Missouri and Kansas. Yeah. This is a great way to test Missouri and Kansas without having to spend a ton of money. Yeah. So I just think that, marketing in places where people already gather has worked so well in the past. Those groups don't exist anymore on LinkedIn and Facebook. And if they do, nobody interacts with them. It's about now looking at the variety of options we have to then pick and choose what's right for that specific audience and that specific segment. So I think it's really important that you keep that in mind as you build those plans.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Aaron. I know nothing about marketing relative to you, so I need to know all these nuggets from you.
I know very little about enrollment marketing compared to you. So no, it's really just cool to see our unique perspective, even when we talk about the funnel, right? We did a dry run on this and we had to talk through like what the funnel was. But no, Tyler, so appreciate your perspective and you joining today. We've covered a lot and this has just been really incredible and I appreciate your time doing this. So If you're watching, thank you so much for tuning in. We're really excited to have you here. If you're interested in learning more about NextGrad and our 600 screens across our high schools in North America, feel free to reach out to us at nextgrad.com. And yeah, we'll be in touch with you soon.
Thanks.